Snow is falling, the house is warm, and today we're throwing calories and caution to the wind. From pillowy homemade cinnamon rolls made right from the bread machine and smothered in the silky cream cheese icing to a rich, savory steak and ale pie bubbling out the oven, this is the ultimate snow day splurge with the family. If cozy, decadent comfort food is something that you are loving right now, you're going to want to stay for this video. When I woke up on the snow day, I just didn't feel like talking at all. Everything outside was so clean and still, and I didn't want to be the one that broke the peace. So seeing the snow earlier that morning just made me feel calm in a way that I really just didn't want to interrupt. So the night before, I actually decided I was going to make cinnamon rolls for my family. The recipe was pretty simple. It was basically in a rich dough with butter and eggs. It kind of had a brioche feeling to it, to be honest. The recipe that I followed, the girl said that her family absolutely loved them, and honestly, I can understand why, because this dough turned out beautiful. It was very easy to work with. It was pliable, it was soft, but it was tough enough that when you rolled it out, it held its shape and its thickness. Honestly, I think this will become my go-to recipe for cinnamon rolls. Now, as you can see, this recipe is a bread machine recipe, and if you've seen any of my videos, you know I love a bread machine recipe. It's so easy. You know, I was able to do this early and kind of go back and spend my day looking at the snow and just enjoying life. I find this super convenient. You don't have to have a bread machine to make this dough, but like I said, this is what I am using. Now the filling, I actually used a different recipe for the filling because the person that I was following for the dough made like a paste, and I didn't let my butter soften enough to do that. So I decided to follow a recipe that I saw online, and I just cut up half a block of unsalted butter. I do think next time I will try the paste from the recipe that they used, because as you'll see later, I do think the paste would have worked better than what I did. I actually just put the cubed butter onto the dough after I rolled it out into a rectangle, and then I sprinkled brown sugar and cinnamon all over the dough. It did turn out great, so if you want to do it this way, you absolutely can. However, when I cut my dough into the actual cinnamon rolls, I realized that I did have some of the filling spilling out, and the brown sugar and the cinnamon, it just kind of went more over my countertop than in the cinnamon roll. So I do think the paste would have actually stuck better into the roll of the cinnamon rolls. And so I'm definitely going to try the paste next time. But as you can see, I just sprinkled some brown sugar, and I used a sieve to make sure the cinnamon wasn't clumpy. And honestly, I just eyeballed it. Then I rolled my dough lengthwise and then pinched the ends together to keep the insides from spilling out as best that I could. Then I cut my cinnamon roll log in half. Then I cut those two halves in half, so I had 4 pieces. And then I took those 4 pieces and cut each one into 3. That way I ended up having 12 perfect sized cinnamon rolls. Also, I have to point out, when the sun was coming in the window, it really made all of this look so beautiful. My sister kept saying how pretty the cinnamon rolls looked, and the dough looked when the sun was actually coming through the window. And when I went back and edited, I have to say it was quite pretty. But anyway, I did decide to bake these in the Finex cast iron. I really do like Finex a lot. However, I do look at it more for kind of the aesthetics. I mean, cast iron is cast iron within reason. This Finex is a showstopper. It's beautiful. Now, all the little points and everything, they do have a reason, and I will link Finex below. But you don't have to have a Finex or honestly cast iron to bake cinnamon rolls. Now, I do really like Smithy cast iron as well. I will link them below. It's a great company. Also, Lodge is a very affordable, good brand, and sometimes you can even find them at TJ Maxx. But I did like the way the cinnamon rolls baked in the cast iron. So if you do have a cast iron, try it. But after I covered my cinnamon rolls and let those rest for basically an hour, I decided I was going to make the icing from the recipe that I was using for the dough. But my sister actually loves cream cheese icing. So I went on Google really quickly and I found a different recipe to use for her. So I understand this is kind of a hodgepodge of things. I'm going to link everything below, but I will say this cream cheese frosting was some of the best I've ever had. Now, I did notice that watching the video from the recipe, the icing from the main recipe I'm using was much thinner. So I guess depending on what you like, you absolutely could try either. I also did scramble some eggs so that we'd have a little bit of protein with our breakfast. And if you are looking for a splurge, decadent, delicious, sweet breakfast, this is an amazing recipe. It is definitely going into my vault. I will pull these out when I'm trying to impress because these turned out so good. They were sweet, but they weren't too sweet. They were soft, but the edges were crispy from using the cast iron. The cream cheese was the perfect consistency. It was thick, but yet it melted down the sides, but it wasn't like it just dissolved. It was sturdy enough to handle these cinnamon rolls. Now, like I said, I do think I would do the paste, the brown sugar cinnamon paste, instead of just sprinkling the cinnamon and brown sugar. But guys, try these. 10 out of 10, maybe even 11 out of 10. One of the best cinnamon rolls I've had. And I was a big fan of Cinnabon, but I honestly think these are better because they're not as sweet. I think these are incredible. Now, I don't know where you guys live, but where I was at, it snowed so much. And my parents' dog absolutely loves playing in the snow. And it makes me think of that meme where you see these Alaskan snow dogs out there sleeping in the snow and just having all this fun. And then my 16-year-old pup, he hates the cold and he doesn't want to do anything when it is cold like this. So I had to show him in his little boots and his sweater. He's just not a snow dog. So he did not care for this weather at all. Anyway, after breakfast, it was time to make the pie crust because as a family, we did decide that my sister would make her steak and ale pie. Let me just say, this recipe is phenomenal. The entire day was quite indulgent, start to finish, but worth every single bite because it was amazing. Now, I will tell you right up front, I did not make enough pie crust. I accidentally used my standard pie crust recipe instead of the larger one that my sister's recipe used. So if you're following my crust recipe that I'll link below, you will definitely want to double it. I ended up just rolling mine much thinner than I normally would, and you'll see what happens at the end, but flavor-wise, the crust was incredible, as always. It's simple, it's just butter, flour, ice water. Your butter needs to be freezer cold, and I just pulse everything together in my food processor until the crumbs just barely start to cling together. Now, I did add 2 extra tablespoons this day of water because I just felt like it was a little bit dry, and that is totally okay. You can fill your dough. Trust yourself, trust your dough. Now, you will want to put your dough out onto your countertop where you're going to actually knead it together. And at first, it's going to look like it's never going to come together. It is crumbly and messy and feels a little bit hopeless. But if you're patient and you gently press it together on the counter, it will form the dough. It probably took me about 10 minutes working with it, but eventually it came together beautifully. And once it does, you're going to wrap it up and let it rest in the fridge. Now, you can refrigerate it for a few hours overnight or freeze it. It just does need some time to rest. You do have to plan a little bit in advance because of this. However, you can also make this way ahead of time, days ahead of time if you need to. Now, for my sister's steak and ale pie. She follows a recipe that she originally found on TikTok. It is by Pinch of Mint. Now, I will do my absolute best to find the actual written recipe for this, but I will also, tell you where you can go and find it if I'm not able to find the actual link to a recipe. Now, it's everything that you would expect in a rich, hearty pie. Carrots, onions, celery, garlic, All of this chopped up to your preferred size. It stews down beautifully. If you've watched my channel before, you know that I am not an onion fan, but once they're cooked low and slow like this, they practically melt into a sauce, and you can barely tell that they're there. Now the recipe does start with bacon, cooked until crisp, and then you want to make sure you cube your steak, salt and peppered, and then seared in batches in a Dutch oven. Now my sister takes her time flipping each piece individually. It is not required, but it does give it the meat this gorgeous, even crust, and honestly, you can tell that she really makes this pie with love and how much time she puts into it. Once your steak is brown and the vegetables are softened, follow with seasoning, garlic, add your bacon back, and then just a couple tablespoons of flour to help thicken the stew. Then you're gonna add a little bit of tomato paste. This just adds some depth and some acidity. And then comes the star ingredient, a dark stout. Now she uses Guinness and adds the full amount, followed by some rich beef stock that my mom makes on her own, which does form a layer of fat on the top, something my sister absolutely refuses to deal with. So I have to step in for that part. Big sister to the rescue. Then she actually adds a bay leaf in. I don't think the recipe called for that, but she likes to add it in there just for some added flavoring. And then you're going to put the whole Dutch oven into the oven to slowly cook for a couple hours. Now once the filling is ready, it is time to roll out the crust. And you're going to see those little butter pieces throughout the dough. That's exactly what you are wanting so that you can have that flakiness. I did divide my dough into two parts, 1/3 and 2/3. I rolled out the bottom layer, which once again was thinner than ideal because I didn't double my standard recipe, just didn't know. But then I did fit it into a buttered pie dish. It was a little bit warm in the house, so I did have to roll it in between parchment paper just to make the dough easier to handle. And I did stick it in the fridge one time just to let it cool down, you know, from me working with it. Next, I rolled out the top so that it would be ready to go once we filled the pie. Now, here's where timing matters. Ideally, the stew should have cooled completely before going into the crust. Ours didn't. And because of that, and because my crust was a little bit thin, the top softened more than I honestly would have liked. It still tasted amazing. It was actually quite crisp before essentially melting like it did. But if you're making this, you are going to want to let your pie filling cool completely. Then we filled the pie, topped it, crimped the edges, and this time I did brush it with an egg wash because I wanted that deep golden flaky finish. Now I don't always bother with an egg wash, but for pie, I do think it's worth it. It isn't the prettiest pie I've ever made, but sometimes that's just what happens. And honestly, on this snow day, it was more about flavor than perfection. To finish the night, we served it over a spoonful of mashed potatoes. The crust was flaky and crisp, but the filling was rich and savory with a hint of sweetness from the vegetables. It was hearty, warm, and honestly exactly what a snow day calls for. And overall, an absolutely perfect decadent family winter day of meals.